Hey, what's up, guys? It's Bakes, and thank you for joining me for this episode of my top 10 series. Today's episode is my top 10 favorite horror franchise killers or villains, however you want to word it. So, this list is obviously pretty straightforward. You're going to see some pretty familiar faces. But, of course, if you feel like I'm missing out on any, feel free to let me know in the comments below. But as I said, this is just my personal 10 favorites. The only criteria that the villains or killers had to meet is, as I said, they need to be part of a horror franchise. So I've always counted a franchise as being 4 or more movies, so it can't just be a once-off killer in a standalone slasher. I'm trying to think of an example, Charlie from Charlie's Farm or something. One that really hurt to not include on this list because there are 3 movies, which makes it a trilogy, not a franchise, and that was Pennywise from It. As I said, I think Pennywise is just super iconic in general, but 2 great performances from Tim Curry and Bill Skarsgård. So that one really hurt to not include on the list, but as I said, I wasn't going to break my own rules. But I do want to quickly give an honourable mention to one that was at my number 10, but I swapped it out for my 11 last second, literally just before this video. And I'll give a quick reasoning of why I swapped it out as well. But the honourable mention goes to the Cenobites from Hellraiser / Pinhead, whatever you want to call them. The reason why I swapped them out, because honestly I actually haven't seen too many of the later Hellraiser movies. And when I think back on the first Hellraiser movie, which is my favourite, and I love Hellraiser, it's common knowledge that the Cenobites aren't actually in the movie that often, but I always think of the antagonist of that movie being Frank Cotton, and I think he's super underrated, and he's great as the villain of that movie, but I feel like the Cenobites / Pinhead take a step back, so that's why I moved them out from my 10 to 11 and put my 11 into 10, but that's a quick honorable mention that I wanted to get out of the way. But either way, let's get into my list of my top 10 favorite horror franchise villains or killers. Alright, so starting off at my number 10, and I know straight away a lot of you guys are going to be saying, how did Pinhead and the Cenobites get pushed out for this guy? But I'm not going to lie, I have a real soft spot for him. Coming in at number 10 is the Leprechaun from the Leprechaun franchise. I mean, these movies are just so much fun, and a lot of it come down to Warwick Davis's performance as the Leprechaun. I mean, it's just fun, and I'm just going to keep it as simple as that. Yes, he's not overly scary or anything like that, but he has just got so much charisma and personality, so I wanted to include him on this list. As I said, all of the movies are pretty fun, and even the lesser entertaining movies, Warwick Davis still does a great job as the Leprechaun. So coming in at my number 10 is the Leprechaun from Leprechaun. Alright. And moving into my number 9, taking a little bit more of a more serious approach, here I have Candyman from the Candyman franchise. I mean, Tony Todd in the first 3 Candyman movies, just super iconic, and I know he does have a later, role as Candyman again in the rebooted sequel, but just for a moment. I just really love the lore and the backstory behind Candyman. I love his mannerisms and how he speaks. It's like oddly calming and hypnotic, but he's so menacing and deadly as well. I just find Candyman to be super iconic, super underrated as well. I'm sure a lot of people would maybe just have him bordering on the top 10, but I'm guessing more people would have him outside of it. But I love Candyman, as I said, super iconic. I think Tony Todd does a great job playing him and bringing him to life. So coming in at my number 9 is Candyman from the Candyman films. Coming in at my number 8 is one that I also find to be super underrated again. Here I have the Creeper from the Jeepers Creepers films. Obviously, I just want to quickly get out of the way. Some people are going to be like, oh, you can't support this movie because of the director and what he's done, and you just got to block out everything to do with the Jeepers Creepers franchise. I'm one to separate the art from the person that made it, so that's what I'm doing here. And again, I just want to bring up the Creeper and just keep it to that. The Creeper, as I said, I've always found him to be super underrated. He's one of the killers on this list that has always genuinely given me chills and sort of creeped me out. He's just so primal, but you can also tell there's like intelligence there, and still enough to give him personality and not just make him a beast, even though he is. Again, like Candyman, I love the lore and the backstory behind the Creeper. He's just super intimidating and brutish, and he's just awesome. Obviously, in Jeepers Creepers Reborn, he was recast and he was done differently, and that is terrible. But I feel like the first three movies is enough to keep the Creeper on this list. He's great in the first, great in the second, and even though Jeepers Creepers 3 is not amazing at all, I still find the Creeper to be entertaining in that film as well. So coming in at my number 8 is the Creeper from Jeepers Creepers. Coming in at my number 7, I'm sure a lot of people would have had this killer on their list. Here I have the Ghostface Killer from the Scream franchise. The reason why I probably don't have the Ghostface Killer higher is the fact that it's a different person under the mask every film. And I think that sort of takes the passion and love out of the killer more, especially compared to other killers on this list, purely because, the motives and the reasoning of being the killer under the mask is changing so often, it's hard to sort of stay connected to it, but it is cool, the Ghostface mask is so slick, calling on the phone, and what's your favourite scary movie? It's super iconic, so I'm going to keep this one short and sharp. Coming in at my number 7 is the Ghostface Killer from the Scream franchise. Coming in at my number 6 is Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. Now, again, this is sort of a weird one to talk about because it's not just Leatherface as the villain for this franchise. You got to remember, it's kind of the entire Sawyer family, especially through the earlier movies. Leatherface is just sort of there as the big muscle and the intimidation factor. But in the first movie, it's all of the Sawyer family sort of taking their roles as antagonists. In the second movie, you got Chop Top there as well. Even in the remake, I find the dad, I forget his name, he's pretending to be the sheriff or whatever. He is the scariest part of that movie. But of course, Leatherface is sort of the face of the franchise, and he does take the wheel, as the films go later on with installments. He's super iconic. He's arguably on the Mount Rushmore of horror villains and killers. He's definitely up there, and I had to have him on this list. As I said, it's just a bit of a weird one because the Sawyer family factor comes into it, and there's a whole bunch of them. But I needed to include him on this list because he's super iconic, and I still really do have a soft spot for him. So coming in at my number 6 is Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. Moving on to my top 5 now, and coming in at my number 5 is one that could be a little bit of a dark horse, considering he is a fresher face when it comes to horror movie icons and killers. But here I have Art the Clown from the Terrifier franchise / All Hallows Eve. Now, a lot of people are probably thinking, you said they need to be part of a franchise. There are only 2 Terrifier movies, and a third one is coming out, but still, either way, that's a trilogy. Art the Clown was also a part of the All Hallows Eve anthology films. So technically he's been in 4 movies, and I think he was even in a short before them as well. So either way, he meets the criteria of being in a franchise. And I love Art the Clown. I feel like a lot of people are on the hype train for Art the Clown purely because of recency bias, and a lot of people really loved Terrifier 2, especially. But believe the hype, because Art the Clown is awesome. He is just super genuinely menacing, but he's also super entertaining. For someone who doesn't talk, he has so much charisma, and he is just, as I said, endlessly entertaining. You can't take your eyes off him. He's creepy, he's the whole package, and as I said, he's going to be a future horror movie icon. I feel like he's already sort of at that icon status now. And as I said, for someone who is, on the grand scheme of all horror franchises, new on the block, he's done such a great job, and he's just endlessly entertaining, and I can't wait for Terrifier 3 to come out. So coming in at my number 5, I'm just going to leave it there. Art the Clown from the Terrifier franchise / All Hallows Eve. Alright. Moving on to my number 4. A lot of people are going to have this guy at their number 1, and even now I'm looking at it and I'm like, wow, only at my number 4, but here I have Michael Myers from the Halloween franchise. What is there to say about Michael Myers? Just the plain white mask, slow walk, stab, stop, look at what he's done, twists his head a little bit, and moves on. There's something about it, just the force of nature. Is he human? Is there anything behind his eyes? No one knows, really. He is just a pure killing machine, and there's something that everyone loves about Michael Myers, and me included, obviously. As I said, it feels weird only having him at my number 4, but I have 3 horror killers ahead of him. The theme comes into play as well. Such an iconic theme by John Carpenter. What else can I say about Michael Myers? Everyone knows this guy. He is my number 4. I'll leave it there. Moving on to my number 3. Very similar to Michael Myers in ways. Here I have at my number 3 Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th films. Obviously I picked up part 2 because this is our proper introduction as having Jason Voorhees as the killer. As I said, in ways very similar to Michael. Doesn't speak, a big brooding force of nature. Kind of like Michael, just somehow able to get to places where somehow he's not running, but he's getting there. Just a lot of similarities there. But I love Jason. And it's weird, you sort of can't pinpoint it, but I love the Friday the 13th franchise. I think a lot of it just comes down to the fun, creative kills. Everyone loves a camp-based slasher, and Jason just fits the mold of sort of what you picture when you think of, slashers that take place in a camp. I just think he's super iconic. I'm going to keep this one short and sharp as well. Coming in at my number 3 is Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th franchise. And coming in at my number 2, here I have Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Freddy was sort of the first franchise slasher to have a personality and charisma. As I said, we had Michael, silent, walked slow. You couldn't really tell what was going on behind the mask. Same with Jason. Freddy comes along and starts talking and making quips. He has a personality, and I think there is just something so infectious about that. All that aside, he is awesome. He can go in people's dreams, manipulate the landscapes to whatever terrifies the person having the nightmare. I just think Freddy Krueger is awesome, super iconic, and as I said, I think it just really helps is the fact that he was sort of the first slasher to have a personality and charisma and, bringing something fresh to the horror landscape. So coming in at my number 2 is Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street. Alright, and to finish off my list, coming in at my number 1, I've said this in other videos before, so it might not be a surprise to some people, but here I have Chucky from the Child's Play franchise. Now, again, like Freddy, he has a personality, he has charisma, he will talk back, and he has quips, and he has funny moments, he has one-liners, but also for a doll, I find him to be pretty scary, honestly. Not so much anymore, but out of every horror icon that I've had on this list, and horror killer, villain, whatever you want to call him, Chucky was the one that scared me the most growing up, and I could say I was scared of Chucky before even seeing Child's Play. I remember from the youngest age, I saw Child's Play obviously when I was very young. I grew up watching horror movies, but seeing the cover sit on the shelf and just being like, what the fuck is that doll doing? It would scare the shit out of me. And I would go through, I'm sure other people saw this as well, when you would go through a mall and they had, the actual Chucky doll sitting up on the shelves and stuff. That would freak me out as well. Actually, watching the movie made me less scared of Chucky in a way, but he's easily become such a top favorite horror icon for me. I just think he's so iconic. As I said, I love his one-liners. I love how he can balance being scary but also fun. I just think Chucky is the entire package. As I said, he is my favorite. He's my number 1, but it was close, obviously, but I think Chucky just takes the cake for me. So there we go, guys. That is my top 10 list of my top 10 favorite horror franchise killers, villains, icons, whatever you want to call it. As usual, we'll do a quick little recap before we move on. At my number 10, I had the Leprechaun from the Leprechaun franchise. I just think he brings a fun factor. Even though the movies are a little bit silly, it's still entertaining, and the Leprechaun is iconic in those movies. Candyman from the Candyman franchise. Love the lore and backstory. Same with this one. The Creeper from the Jeepers Creepers came in at my number 8. Just primal, brutish, but yeah, just really intimidating as well. 7 was the Ghostface Killer, which I'm sure a lot of people would have probably had higher on their list, but as I said, I think just the fact that it's a different person under the mask every time sort of changes it up a little bit for me. Coming in at my number 6, Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. This was a bit of a weird one to talk about because, he's not the only antagonist in the franchise. The whole Sawyer family comes into play here, but still, Leatherface, he deserves a spot on this list, so it came in at my number 6. My number 5 was the newest boy on the block. Here we have Art the Clown from the Terrifier / All Hallows Eve franchise. My number 4 was Michael Myers. As I said, I have a feeling that a lot of people will have him at number 1. He's just super iconic and he's great. 3 was Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th franchise. There is just something about Jason Voorhees. I've always been a big fan of him. I was sort of lost for words when I brought him up as my number 3. But as I said, there's just something about Jason, and he brings just so much enjoyment to the franchise. So he was my number 3. And my number 2 was Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street. As I said, sort of the first slasher to bring personality, and he had one-liners and quips. You had Leatherface, he didn't speak. You had Jason and Michael, they were both silent as well. But Freddy was out here making quips and one-liners, and he had a personality and charisma, and he just brought a totally different game to the table. So he was my number 2. And coming in at my number 1, it's Chucky. And as I said, it's probably weird for me to say that out of all the slashers and killers and icons here, Chucky was the one that scared me the most growing up. But he's just held a spot in my heart the longest. I love Chucky. It's probably why I love the Child's Play franchise as much as I do, because the films get worse as they go, especially later in the franchise, but man, Chucky's great, and every time he's on screen I love it, so he came in at my number 1. But as I said, guys, feel free to let me know your favorites in the comments below. As I said, I had to swap out the Cenobite / Pinhead last minute. I just feel like I couldn't really justify having them in the top 10, but I'm sure a lot of people would probably have them in their top 10. Other ones that crossed my mind are the Jigsaw Killer. Again, sort of the reason why I didn't put them in is just because a lot of the killing is done by apprentices, and it's swapping each time. It's just hard to keep up with. Victor Crowley from the Hatchet franchise. There's just so many out there that could have been on this list. But as I said, let me know your lists in the comments below. And thank you for joining me for this top 10 episode again. And I'll see you for another video soon, guys. Peace.